Space Above and Beyond was a notable mid-90s military science fiction series, and in many ways a missed opportunity. Perhaps most memorable for R. Lee Ermey doing his trademark drill instructor bit in the pilot episode.
In space, no one can hear you scream unless it is the battle cry of the United States Marines.
Above and Beyond faintly echoes earlier works like Joe Haldeman's Forever War and hazily presages some aspects of the Battlestar Galactica remake. At least, that's how it fits in my cranial clutter. It weaves a macro-level story of interstellar war with a tragic tale of a young couple separated by circumstances beyond their control.
I'll find you!
It had the potential to be a landmark of the genre, but thanks largely to clunky writing, it instead faded away over the course of a single season. The story begins with Nathan and Kylan, a young couple on the crew of an interstellar colony mission. They're in the middle of a launch simulation, a last chance check to make sure everything is as it should be, because the launch of this incredibly complex, expensive, years in the making mission is slated for the next day. But Nathan and Kylan get called into the chief's office and informed that 10 members of the crew are being bumped.
The launch will be scrapped unless 10 in vitros are on board.
And one of them, but only one, has to go.
We'll both resign.
You have a commitment to execute vital assignments on this mission. Duties which one of you could cover, but for which no one else is trained.
Through this scene, we're made aware that some years before, the state bred a population of in vitro fertilized tank-grown people, initially to fight the silicates, sapient androids that they created, who inevitably rebelled. The in vitros served as that war's cannon fodder and later replaced the silicates as the cheap labor underclass. We're presented with a civilization that lacks both the moral fiber to not rely on slavery and the fortitude to embrace their brutal nature. They consistently do bad things and then try to atone in clumsy symbolic ways to make themselves feel better, and in so doing they sabotage themselves by being both wicked and weak.
These in vitros didn't train, these senators haven't sacrificed. Why should we pay for a mistake they made before we were even born?
In this instance, we're not given any indication that the in vitro crew replacements are skilled anywhere near the level of the original crew. It's implied that they're just warm bodies there to look good on someone's ESG report.
You believed in equal rights for in vitros.
Not at the expense of our rights. We've trained, we've sacrificed, we've dreamed. Together.
A massively expensive program to establish human civilization around another star is compromised for short-term political gain at the last minute.
They're not even trained. I mean, send them on the next colony.
The next colonial mission won't be ready for 5 years. There are members of Congress who need to look good now.
This isn't the last time they show us that their political leaders are complete trash, but hey, some things never change. But a show about that would probably get dull real quick. As the series progresses, we learn that the prime contractor, Aerotech, was aware that there is another technological civilization in that area of space, and they may perceive dropping a colony there as an act of aggression. The company executives keep it to themselves, the defenseless colony is wiped out, and the military-industrial complex, Aerotech included, gets fat wartime profits. Evil corporate conspiracy? Check. The first episode mostly follows Nathan as he goes through Marine Corps basic training with his new band of bros. Yes, women can be bros. It's situationally dependent.
Why did you join my precious Marine Corps?
Sir, to defend my country, sir!
To defend your country from what? We have no enemies. Are you crazy? I think you made a horrible mistake!
It's in this first episode that they plant the seeds of future problems with the series. I like the idea of this show. I'm always drawn to near-term military sci-fi. That concept of we have faster-than-light spacecraft, but otherwise its current tech appeals to me. It's one of the things I like about Battlestar Galactica. Where Above and Beyond drops the ball is on the military side, and it creates a foundation of sand for the rest of the series. What is Nathan's MOS? I have no idea. He's a fighter pilot, a transport pilot, an infantryman, driver of tiny tanks. He may be the head cook in the galley too, for all I know. The same applies to the entire crew. Episode to episode, they do whatever war shit the story calls for, and it gets in the way of developing the individual characters fully and giving us a sense of how the war is proceeding. It's always just one slice, and it's an inconsistent slice that we can never quite bite into. Consider instead if the show had given us smaller groups of Marines with different specializations. We get Nathan and Shane as fighter pilots. He's college educated and already astronaut trained, and she's from a military family. Say she did some ROTC and has some flight training. They make sense as fighter pilots, and we keep that tension between a mutual attraction and Nathan still pining for Kylan, who may or may not be alive. Make McQueen the squadron leader, and they're the point of view characters for the fighter pilot stuff. Then we get, say, Hawks and maybe Damphus as infantry, and we get all that ground pounder stuff through them. Wang's a transport pilot, and we keep Commodore Ross right where he is. This way we get to do individual episodes focusing primarily on smaller groups of characters in their own elements, and through that we have different perspectives to tell the story of the war and how it's going without having to straight up explain things in dialogue. The characters can still interact with each other, but only when it serves the story. Otherwise, they all do what they do best, instead of all being clumped together all the time, jockeying for screen time and getting in each other's way. And we as the audience know more about the big picture than any of the characters do, letting the story unfold in more coherent and believable ways. But it was the 90s and TV had different conventions. Above and Beyond ended up starting with a good setup, ending with a premise that had potential, but with a lot of mediocre filler episodes in between to bulk up a full season. All the usual boilerplate episodes about tragic pasts, an unstoppable enemy pilot, a struggle with addiction.
They make you feel good now, but they'll hurt you, Cooper.
Celebrity cameos, none of it really advancing the story much. But there's the bones of a good story here. With the war well underway, Episode 6 gives us a political story set against the backdrop of Earth coming together in the face of a common threat, but that same solidarity sparking concerns about sovereignty and cultural survival. There's an election coming for essentially the president of Earth, and it's between Ambassador Hayden, a fairly meek and unassuming blind woman, and a militant French firebrand, obviously meant to echo some National Socialist influence.
Representing the ultra-right-wing Identity Party Nationaliste.
France secedes from the EU in this one, seemingly to show that he's rash and not a team player.
I don't know about this guy.
Everyone's worried about this guy getting elected and doing horrible things like not letting transnational bureaucracies steamroll entire countries, and he's the obvious villain. Except that there's a plot to assassinate him by people that are so committed to the principles of democracy that they can't take the chance on people voting the wrong way. Hayden is aware of this plot. She was also part of Aerotech's board and aware that they knew about the alien threat.
You were on the Aerotech Board of Governors. Don't the lives of the colonists mean anything?
By the end of the episode, the seemingly clear-cut reasonable person versus unhinged radical setup is replaced by a much more nuanced and gray struggle between a threatening candidate with simplistic solutions but legitimate concerns, and a calm, calculating creature of the establishment that will participate in horrible things to maintain the status quo.
But to get elected.
If you make a fuss about releasing me, you risk losing something you want.
Something we want.
I notice you're on the other side of the bars.
Nathan confronting her about what she knew and rejecting a medal from her as the newly elected Secretary General is a solid ending for what should have been a pivotal point in a season arc.
I'd rather have the truth than the medal.
On a personal level, it brings Nathan's disillusionment full circle. He started as an idealistic young man setting out to colonize the stars with his girlfriend. The system smacked him down. Here he's smacked down again, only now it's by the highest authorities. He knows the system is corrupt, and he's fighting in its service. He has to reorient himself. On the macro level, it reveals that the war wasn't a surprise. It may not have even been accidental.
They knew. They knew the aliens existed. We all believed we were alone in the universe. But they knew they were there, and they knew what did happen.
For this group of Marines, it's become a two-front war. The aliens in front of them, and the politicians and corporations stabbing them in the back.
He knew we were there.
The only thing I know now, what I knew before, is the Chig's capacity for lies.
He's a pawn in someone else's corrupt game. More than that, it sets up the question of what he's really fighting for. It's not the Chigs that destroyed his life. At every step, it's been his own government and the corrupt people behind it. He's putting his life on the line for people that, by rights, he should be fighting against. This is where Above and Beyond really reminds me of Forever War. In that book, when the war is over, they learn that the military-industrial complex deliberately triggered it and subjected humanity to 1,000 years of war in the search for short-term profits. Above and Beyond gives us a condensed, watered-down, TV-safe version of that same kind of war started and waged by a government that is corrupt to the core. It's a story told through the point of view of characters forced to fight for a government, perhaps a civilization, that when examined objectively, doesn't really give any reason to fight for it. Victory means bad guys win. And in both cases, we're looking at stories written before the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Both are drawing on Vietnam as the primary influence. They predate the global war on terror that has so defined our image of war over the last quarter century. Sounds really old when I phrase it that way. And consequently, it all seems very anachronistic when we watch it today. The build-up toward the season finale begins with our squad of Marines patrolling a dark jungle, jumping at shadows. They come across a hive of sorts, alien fetuses growing in pods sheltered in a cave. Within the story, it's a juxtaposition of Hawks, the tank-grown in vitro, finding a sense of familiarity and kinship with this brood.
This is going to sound really weird. Something about this room feels familiar.
But it's also an echo of the Vietnam-era baby killer curse hurled at returning vets, with the squad arguing about whether to jeopardize their mission by telling the locals that a massive bombardment is coming, or sticking to their orders and letting the little podlings get blown into chunky salsa. It's an attempt to set up a moral dilemma, but it imposes too many assumptions.
You know why I don't think it's the enemy? It doesn't feel like it.
And so our squad of simple jacks explained to the caretaker that the planet is about to get stomped. With only a couple of episodes left, they had a choice. If they knew that one season was all they were going to get, they could have ended with a peaceful settlement, forever war style. Reveal it was all a mistake caused by the greedy military-industrial complex and all is forgiven. On the other hand, if they were fully committed to a second season, then they could have built toward a failed offensive and a cliffhanger staring down into a new phase of the war. But they really didn't know, so they split the difference. The aliens made a peace overture, the useless president assumes a win and makes a big public announcement.
And I am relieved to announce that peace negotiations will commence immediately.
Damn her. I said not to jump the gun.
Evil corporate tool ruins the talks by being an evil corporate tool.
You are murderous. You are bloodthirsty. You are barbarous, treacherous. You should be destroyed.
And the war is back on, with Wang getting killed in the process. Nathan and Kylan are reunited, only to be separated again. The whole thing feels like spinning wheels in the mud, which I suppose really fits the time. It's a Vietnam echo, mostly watched by people with no memory of that war. It was made during the time before the war on terror gave us new conflicts to stylize in media, but years after the Cold War had ended. The Red Menace was gone, but the promised peace dividend was starting to feel a little light. Space above and beyond, like mid-1990s America, felt a little lost. Maybe it would have gotten better following the course that it was on, but in both cases, it didn't get the chance. Now I have to walk all the way back down this mountain.